So today I'm going to show you a trick in Storyline for passing bypass blocks, which is a WCAG 2.1 criteria, and it's level A, so it's pretty much an expectation that you cover this type of this requirement. So it affects, in e-learning, it affects you when you've got buttons like this that might appear across the top of every single page. Because as a mouse user, they don't really affect my navigation. I can just kind of float along to what I need to on the page. And say if we imagine that this stuff in here is where content would generally appear, I can always just easily get to where those need to be. But keyboard users use, it's just, there we go, tab. So if you imagine if this is at the top of every single page, focus starts at the top, and they would have to navigate through these every single time a different page loads. Like that. So as you imagine, that could become quite annoying after a bit if you've got quite a few pages to get to these, you know, even if you've just got a next button on every page, if they're not trying to get to content in there, but they have to go through these every single time, it can be annoying, which is why bypass blocks, I can't seem to talk today, bypass blocks is in place. So it makes us consider that navigation for a keyboard user. So what I've got here is, if I just refresh that page, is we've got a skip to content button at the top of the page there, which is the first thing that focuses on. And as I press enter on that, so that appears as I focus on it. So if you're a mouse user, it doesn't really appear on the page. It's as we hit tab. It just means that we skip the content immediately. So those disappear, and the next thing I focus on is on the content, which means I avoid those buttons. So in order to do this, I've got everything happening on my master slide. So if you already create your buttons and you put them on every slide, just that's not helping anyone. Don't do that, because it for yourself as well, if you ever change the design of one of those buttons, you're going to have to change it on a lot of different slides. So if you're not already using master slides for this type of thing, which I expect you will be anyway, use this video as a handy thought for, hey, let's get everything on the master slide. So I've got my top bar as a layer on the master slide. At the moment, these buttons aren't doing anything. So that the reason why they've got unassigned triggers on them at the moment is just so you can see keyboard focus when we're in preview. Keyboard focus generally only appears over, whoopsie daisy. Keyboard focus generally only appears when you're, there we go, when the button is ready to do something. And if there's a trigger assigned to it, then it feels ready to do something on there. So my top bar is on a layer of its own, and when the timeline starts, it will show. So I'll tell you what, let's get rid of all of these triggers. So rather than me just talking through how these work, it'd be best if we just redo them again. So we can start again and have a look at how we've done this. So the only thing I haven't started again is the top bar, which is on a layer on the master slide. So first thing I'm going to get to do is we're going to show the layer top bar when the timeline starts on this slide. And I usually have a hide menu trigger, which is a true or false trigger. And that's just so I can, if I ever change it, then I can just easily hide that layer as well. So if hide menu is false, then it's going to always show that top bar at the start of a slide. And we'll do an else on there as well. Otherwise, it's going to hide layer top bar. So if that is never false, it'll always do the thing where it hides the layer. So we're going to pop that on there. And then skip to content. So I've got a skip to content button here. You don't have to do it this way. I've decided, because if you've got a lot of varying colors at the top here, it might be a bit challenging having a kind of a hidden button for this. I've just decided to do it this way just for fancy sake, but you can obviously have it where it's the button there just on the screen all the time. There's no harm in that whatsoever. So my normal state has got everything the same color as my top bar here, which is fine because I'm just using that top bar. And I've just left one more state in here, which is a down state, which is where it appears. So I'd always recommend, as a keyboard is focused on this button, having a state where it is visible, because yes, screen reader users use keyboard to navigate a page, but there are a lot of users out there who are looking at the page and navigate with keyboard as well, which is why you need to make these buttons visual. So keyboard users as well as screen reader keyboard users will be able to kind of see that button appear and recognize what it's going to do. So when timeline starts, we're going to show layer top bar if hide menu equals false. So now on every timeline start, that bar should be there. There we go. So that's fine. So let's start playing around with this trick now. So first thing is when my button is clicked, it is going to adjust a variable and it's going to set skip navigation to true when the user clicks that button. So now it's going to change a variable. So I've got another variable there called skip navigation, which is a true or false. So we've got hide menu, true or false, skip navigation, true or false, and then I've got a skipped true or false as well. And that's because of a bug in Storyline, which seems to have appeared recently. Since between the first time I came up with this idea and now, there seems to be a new bug in Storyline, which if I just show you my old version, this was my original prototype, lovely looking thing. Whoops. The button keeps on appearing, keeps on going to that state. Didn't used to do that. Seems to recognize that a tab press on slide is every tab press on slide now, not just the first tab press of the slide, which is how that trigger used to respond. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that button appear as we as a keyboard user start to navigate the page. So we're going to user presses a key, tab, after clicking on this slide. So that used to just recognize it as the first click of it, or the first press of it, but it doesn't seem to work that way anymore. So we're going to change state of skip to content button to down, our visible state, when the user presses tab after clicking on this slide. So there we go. So that's now ready to change this to down, and when that is pressed, it's going to set skip navigation value to true. So I've got a top bar and a ready enable and a disable enable. All of these layers don't hide other slide layers. Ready enable and disable enable are just, they're just going to hold triggers on there, but the main purpose of them is they are very short timelines, so they kind of they give a bit of time to do something, which will make more sense when we get further into this. So now when a variable changes, skip navigation, we're going to show the layer disable enable if skip navigation is now true. So we've instigated our event where we want to skip the navigation, which is going to trigger our disable enable. And what disable enable is going to do is simply hide the top bar layer when the timeline starts on this layer if skip navigation is true. Otherwise, it's going to go back to showing the top bar. So we'll put an else in there where it shows it if this layer ever triggers, and that has gone back to false at that point because the bar's ready to reappear. So that's what this layer is going to do, and the layer hides when the timeline finishes, so it just runs that quick action. Okay, so we've got a skip navigation variable checker which shows the layer enable disable if skip navigation equals true. And then ready enable starts the process of re-enabling the top bar so it doesn't disappear for good. So it reappears when we know that we've skipped past it. So this is going to on timeline end, because we don't want it to do it instantly. So timeline end, oh no, my apologies. Get my actions and triggers mixed up quite a bit. So on timeline end, on this layer, we're going to re-show disable enable. And I reckon I've just thought of doing this differently. Let's give this an experiment. On timeline starts on this layer. No, changed my mind. That's fine. So that so when the timeline ends on this layer, show layer disable enable. So that now just does a little quick 0.5 seconds, and then it runs this one, which again will make more sense as we get through this, as we start testing it. All that this is my variable, just showing me my variable so I can see it changing from true to false. If I've got any bugs, should be able to pick those up. So now I want that button to disappear and stop the storyline bug where it reappears if I press tab anymore on this slide. So we're going to go with press as a key tab after the skip to content button. So I've pressed that and it's after I do that now. We are going to adjust the variable. We're going to set skip navigation back to false. And then we'll do one more. It's always going to adjust another variable, set skipped to true. Skipped is really a bad word for this because you might skip past it and not actually use the button. So could probably rephrase that better. Originally I was just going to use the variable where it was just if the navigation had been skipped. But then I thought I want my button to disappear even if they do want to use these buttons, and it still hides that. So it's almost like that trick of it not being there after focus. So could probably rephrase that. But at the moment we'll stick with skipped. And again, so when we've gone past this button, it's going to set skipped to true, which now means that set state of skip to content down, it's only going to do that if skipped is false, which means that it's only going to do it on the first, as we focus on that button for the first time. Otherwise, it's not going to change this state anymore. So we'll just on here as well, just as this timeline is finishing, so we know that everything's about to kind of kick into place where we're on the slide. So we'll just do one more change state of, which will be the skip to content button. We're going to set it back to normal when the timeline ends on here as well. So that should hopefully, I think that's everything. So let's have a test. There's only one way to find out, isn't there? Preview sometimes a little weird with keyboard focus, you know. Look, back there. Okay, let's try again. There we go. So skip to content. So it doesn't matter if I hang around here for a moment, hopefully, all being well. We're going to skip past those buttons now. Okay, so we've just not represented the top bar, so let's just see what we've got going on for that. Oh, nothing's ever enabling this. That'll be the problem, won't it? There we go, bug testing, it's a wonderful world. So when skip navigation changes, yes, my last trigger, if true, otherwise show ready enable. So when it next changes, it'll show ready enable. Let's try that again, because I think the variable did change. Excellent. And there we go. A nice little skip navigation trick. So this is what I was talking about, where the button is staying there. So we'll just add one more little assurance. So at the moment, the button is only disappearing from the ready enable, but this all only happens as things are clicked. So when the user presses tab after clicking the skip navigation button, we're going to add another trigger onto that. Whoopsie daisy. We are going to change state of skip navigation back to normal when the user presses tab. So we've got 3 triggers on there now. There we go. Just disappears again when we go past it. So wunderbar, wonderful. A handy little trick for helping you make sure you pass the criteria of bypass blocks. If you've got navigation or menu buttons at the top of your page, just use this funky little trick and it'll make the experience much better for keyboard and screen reader users. Now, screen reader users, they can get past this just by using their header key, which it does say within the WCAG as well. They can just skip these buttons just by going to the next header. And as long as you've got a header in your content, they can skip past it. But that doesn't cover keyboard users. Keyboard users aren't going to be getting to the next header. They're going to be using tab to get through. So this is a handy little trick for for passing that level A requirement. So it's pretty important requirement, that one. So I hope that's been useful. Let me know if you've got any comments or questions on this, and you're always welcome to get in touch if you want any more information. So thank you ever so much for watching.